comes that I need to read from a script to tell you who I am and what I've done and what I do today, it's probably time for me to stop being a presenter. Imagine that day will come. Excited to have you here to talk about fluid analysis integration. And specifically what we're going to talk about is integrating your fluid analysis results, so your oil analysis, your coolant analysis, your fuel analysis, your grease analysis, directly into your maintenance management platform, or perhaps with your OEM's platform, or maybe it'll even be a third-party service provider that's monitoring things like your telematics, and the value of doing that, and really just how easy that is to accomplish. So I can get my clicker working here. We will get started. So let's talk a little bit about understanding the value and why you would want to integrate. As you can appreciate, it's truly a connected world. And for condition monitoring of our fleets, we're using a whole host of condition monitoring tools. It might be vibration analysis, it might be thermography, it might be ultrasound. We have operator walk-around reports where we're gathering information. And even our work order history that we track in our CMMS or our ERP, those can be really valuable towards a reliability program and understanding problems that we're having with equipment. Now, how many of you have integrated some sort of condition monitoring tools today? Your vibration analysis, couple hands in the back, that's terrific. Has anybody integrated their fluid analysis data, that oil analysis? One, okay. As I travel around the country and I talk to people about have you integrated, typically same results, one or two hands will go up and say they've done it. But I really want to share with you why you should consider doing this as well and just what a difference it'll make. Now, I come from a mining background. I've been with Polaris for about 11 years now. Prior to that, I had over 30 years experience in heavy equipment maintenance and maintenance management. Worked for a very large global mining company, started out there as a mechanic, went up to planner, scheduler, quality assurance, quality control, and then I was assigned to a global position where I worked in South Africa and Australia and here in the States on best practices for maintenance. My primary responsibilities was hydrocarbon management, which included oil analysis, it included contamination control practices, it included storage and handling practices, and the other two categories I specialized in was component replacement and budgeting for maintenance. So when I think back of my time as a mechanic, and I was a lead mechanic, so I had a small crew that reported to me, there was a level of frustration. If we brought a piece of equipment into the shop for scheduled work, and you complete all the work orders, and you're real happy at the job you completed, and you send that equipment back out to production, and within hours, sometimes maybe a day, that equipment would fail. And of course, you'd immediately panic, did we do something wrong with those work orders? And it turned out the failure was something completely unassociated with the repairs we done. It was something we wasn't aware of that the equipment was having a problem with or had been notified about. So there was no awareness there. So we put it back to work and failed. So when I became a maintenance planner, I said, I'm not going to allow that to happen. I'm going to research every bit of condition monitoring we're doing and make sure that if we schedule equipment for downtime, that we're going to address every issue that we can be made aware of. The problem with that is everything was siloed. It was very much segmented. And so if I wanted to look at vibration analysis, I had another platform I had to log into to look at that. If I wanted to look at oil analysis, I had another platform I had to log in. Just remembering all the passwords, right, can be a challenge. And I quickly realized, you know, this is something that's not feasible when you're scheduling 40, 50 jobs a week, sometimes more, trying to go in and look at each component and all that history was just impossible. And I could see why I had that frustration as a mechanic, not knowing everything that was going on with the equipment. We didn't have telematics then per se. It was more of going up on the equipment weekly with a laptop and downloading all the fault codes and the history of the operating conditions. And if I wanted to look at that, we had no integration. I had to actually get the laptop that the technician used for the download and research it. So as you can appreciate, you just lost that holistic view of the equipment health. So maybe I'm being real simplistic, maybe I was being lazy, I like to think I was being efficient. I always thought, you know what, I want to look at my primary maintenance management system. In this case it was an ERP, we're using J.D. Edwards, and I want to just see the equipment that's at risk and why it's at risk. So I've got an example up here on the screen for you. Look at the computer, see what's at risk. And in this example, I had a loader, number 406, that was at risk. And I wanted to understand why it was at risk. So at my fingertips, I could see the last oil analysis report that came in, and it was at a severity 4, so critical, and it showed coolant contamination, increase in sodium and potassium, and engine oil viscosity high. Now, if you're a maintenance manager, a planner, or a scheduler, if you were just looking at that single bit of information, you may or may not take action on it. You might question it. You might say, well, maybe we contaminated the sample when we pulled it. Maybe it wasn't pulled accurately. Maybe we'll wait and pull another sample and see what that comes back at. But in my vision, I could also see, because everything's integrated, I had an operator's report from that morning that reported that their coolant was low. I also had information from onboard sensors that said that there was low coolant level and the engine temperature as the fault codes are running high. Now, as maintenance managers, would that not offer you some greater capabilities in your decision making to have all this information integrated and at your fingertips? It removes all doubt. When you look at this all combined, you know without a doubt you need to take action. And then, if I wanted to dig into the details and see those individual reports, within a click of a button, I could see my oil analysis report, I could see the fault codes that were downloaded, I could see the operator equipment checklist. Show of hands, how many of you think that would be of value to them to see all that information in one place at one time? Absolutely. The technology is here today to do that, and so many people aren't taking advantage of it. I can remember when I first talked to our IT department, I said, hey, I want to start integrating some of this data for that single view. What do you suppose they said? They shut me down immediately. No, too many security concerns, but they're allowing other platforms to start to mingle together and integrate. Today, it's done through an application programming interface, an API, and it removes so much of that security concerns, and it really simplifies the process. Another thing that I wanted is, if I seen all those conditions that I showed you earlier, the oil analysis report, the telematics, the operator walk-around report, I thought, wouldn't it be nice if the system just auto-generated a work order request? I didn't have to have a planner sit and review that and spend all that time deciding whether a request should be made or not. Let the system do it, just auto-generate it. Let's talk a little bit about the capabilities of an API. And these will vary depending on what laboratory you're using, but almost every laboratory out there offers some sort of integration solution for the fluid analysis side. If you you talk with your vibration analysis people, they've probably got an API as well that'll offer you the ability to integrate. Some of the potential capabilities are generate a list in your platform of the samples that's due. Let me tell you why that's so important. A laboratory can only tell you what's due for a sample based on forecasted number of days that it takes you to reach your sample interval. So let me give you an example. Let's say that your sample interval is every 250 hours. The laboratory says, all right, this was the last date that we received a sample on that component. And then we ask the customer, how long does it take you to reach in days that 250 hours? The customer says, well, on average, it takes us 21 days. So the laboratory will look at the last sample received and say, okay, in 21 days you're due for another sample. But how accurate is that? Are all of you very consistent on the operating hours per day? What if the equipment's down for a few days for maintenance? What if production demands just don't require it to be in operation? So now that forecasted when your next samples are due is skewed. You just can't count on that information. So the only way to accommodate that and improve on it is to be able to feed the laboratory your real-time run hours directly from your maintenance management platform or your telematics. And if you provide the laboratory with a running tally each day of those hours, now the laboratory can tell you, you're within 10% of that 250 hours, it's time to pull a sample. And I'm going to show you some examples here of how other customers have done that. Another capability is electronically submit sample data to the lab directly from your platform. How many of you, if you're doing oil, coolant, fuel analysis, are still writing out the handwritten labels that come with your log? A couple? Some are doing electronic data submission through your fluid analysis provider in their platform. That's great, huge improvement. But since you're already collecting that data in your maintenance management platform, and perhaps your telematics, wouldn't it be great to auto-grab that information and provide it to your lab automatically? It really improves everything and it makes sure the lab has accurate information. And I'm also going to show you an example of just what that information looks like. You can retrieve the sample results in a bulk download from the API and integrate it directly into your maintenance management platform. I mentioned the auto-generate work orders based on the sample reports, and this can be done in a host of ways. We have some customers that say, all right, I want to auto-generate work orders based on the severity of the report. If it's a severity 3 or 4 report, auto-generate a work order. We know we want to take action. Other customers, however, say, well, we want to drill in a little more precise. We want to look beyond the severity of the report. And just as an example, if it's a Cummins QSK60 engine and iron reaches 68 parts per million, we want to auto-generate a work order because we know that's a problem, whether the laboratory thinks so or not. So with an API, you can really drill down to those specifics and customize it the way you want to see it. I'm going to show you an example of this as well, but provide action taken to the lab with a single point of entry. So with our laboratory, we offer the capabilities for customers to log in to our reporting software and tell us what action they took. So if we recommended rebuild engine, it's nice to know for the laboratory to know whether you actually rebuilt that engine or not. It's critical to know that information when we evaluate your next sample you submitted. But customers said, you know what, that's double entry. We're already entering that information in a work order and putting it into our maintenance management software. Why would we want to log into your platform and double entry that same information? It's another great thing about data integration. You put it one time in your maintenance management platform, auto feed that through the API, and the laboratory is aware of it. I mentioned this earlier, provide the lab with real-time component and fluid hours. If you're already capturing that, either from your telematics, or it could just be an oiler's report when they fuel the equipment, they're writing down those hours and you're entering those into your CMMS. Now you can feed the laboratory with that information directly as well. What about add, edit, or transfer components? Do any of you have multiple locations, large company, okay? One of the challenges, the laboratory is going to keep those individual locations in a sub-account. And so if you move a component from site A to site B, you have to call up the laboratory and say, hey, we're moving this component from this site to this site. Can you transfer all the sample history to this sub-account? And that can be challenging. But if you're already keeping those transfers in your maintenance management platform, feed that to the API, the laboratory receives it, and we keep your equipment list updated for you. Same as if you purchase a new piece of equipment and want to make the laboratory aware, so the laboratory can alert you when samples are due. Same thing, you enter it in your platform, feed it to the API, and the laboratory is aware. And integration of telematics. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the value of that, of how the laboratory can help you if you share some of the telematics data with the laboratory. So let's take a look at a few integration examples. These are from customers. I haven't modified these slides at all, with the exception of I removed the customer name. They asked me to do so to include it in the presentation. But one customer said, all right, we definitely want to know the samples that are due based on real-time run hours. So the laboratory would feed the information to the API, the customer would pull it from the API, and in their CMMS system, or actually this was an ERP, they were using SAP, they could see the list of all the samples that were due. That little blue checkbox you see in the left, and the component equipment ID, they would just go down and click each one that they were physically going to go out and pull a sample on. When the sample was pulled, this pop-up would appear on their CMMS, and it includes all the information the laboratory needs to process your sample. All that stuff that some of you are still handwriting on that label. And think about a handwritten label. I mean, you've seen them. They're smudged with oil, handwriting from the technicians, almost impossible to read. Having this data accurate, where the laboratory can read it and associate it with the correct component, is vital to a quality fluid analysis program. So now, as you can see, they had this pop-up. Almost every block was auto-populated. Like the current hours on the equipment, and the fluid was pulled from their telematics. The component ID was auto-pulled. In this case, the only thing they had to physically type in was the barcode number that the lab provided to associate it with the physical sample. Once they hit submit to lab, the laboratory has the electronic data on file, and we're just waiting for that physical sample to arrive at the laboratory. When the physical sample arrives, we scan the barcode, which matches up with this information you provided. And it's so much cleaner and faster and accurate that it just offers a world of benefit. I'm going to pause here just for a minute before I show you some other examples. There was supposed to be a slide in here that talked a little bit more about an application programming interface, API, and somehow it was left out and they wouldn't let me add it back in at the last minute here. Security concerns. An API is simply a way for platforms to communicate with each other in a secure manner. So the laboratory does not have any direct access into your maintenance management platform, nor do you have any direct access into the laboratory's software. The laboratory simply takes the data, puts it to an API. You're provided with a security token to access that API. And then you get to pick and choose. It's a smorgasbord of what information you would like to retrieve from the laboratory. So you make the request through the API, we push it to the API, you pull it. And vice versa, if there's information you want to share with the laboratory, such as this sample submission, same thing goes. You're just pushing it to an API and we're pulling. Let me show you another example. This customer wanted a list of potential work orders based on condition monitoring. Now they had their telematics in here, they had their vibration in here, they had their fluid analysis results in here, and then their maintenance planner would review the list on the right. They would select the ones they actually want to create a work order for. They'd click on it, and that box on the left would pop up, raise work order request. And then that person could enter any other text they wanted the technician to be aware of. This was also done in SAP. We had another customer, again, using SAP, that said, you know what, I want to take the human review out of this. It takes too much time, there's too much opportunity to miss something. And they said, did our oil analysis, our coolant analysis come back at severity 3 or 4? We just simply want the system to auto-generate a work order. And that's exactly what they did. They had some customized text, and apologize, I know this is hard to read, but in this big text box here, that was all the information from the laboratory. The data analyst had written regarding the sample results. In the upper right in the orange there was some predefined text the customer wanted to put in, combination of the component type and whether it was the severity 3 or 4, that text auto-populated. And it took the human review completely out of it. Everything is now automated, and it kicked the work order. And it works really, really slick. What about additional capabilities?
I had a real quick question.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
with the auto-generated work order, what did it tell? What was did the company also have like they already told the mechanics what to do? So like, hey, if it was a 3, I want to flush, I want to change filters, I want you to redo it at 2.
Absolutely, great question. And again, it's probably kind of hard to read here, but that's exactly what they have up here in this block here.
Right.
And it says severity 3, flush left rear planetary and refill. So it was predefined. They just built a little bit of a roadmap. If it's this severity for this combination of text provided by the laboratory, then this is the action you need to take.
Because I was going to say, because you have to have some predetermined already like dichotomy broken out, like, hey, when it's this, then this is what I want you guys to do. And then you kind of build that into your, I guess, your SOP for, going through your diagnostics.
Yeah, we can provide the codes associated with the text.
Right.
If it's this, it's tear down and inspect. If it's this, then it's flush and fill.
Right.
Or resample or whatever the case is. Just mapping those codes to the action you want to take. Great question. That same customer said, all right, now that we have it integrated in our maintenance management platform, that is absolutely terrific. It offers a world of value, really increases and improves our reliability. But they would also like to take a little bit more of a holistic view and be able to look, all right, if I want to look at a specific location, a specific component type, a specific asset classification, how's that equipment looking overall? Maybe we need to adjust our drain intervals on a specific component type. So they simply took that bulk data that they were retrieving from the API, and when you retrieve it, you're already going to put it in some sort of data link. Let's take that same raw data and also push it into our data analytics software, whether that be Power BI or Tableau. In this case, it was Power BI. And down the left here, they selected what country. They were a global company. They They select the site, the equipment classification, the model, equipment ID, component ID, component profile, and what type of sample it was. And then they have these bar charts of the severity 3s and 4s. And they can quickly identify what sites had a really good program in place and what locations needed some improvement. And then as they click on these bar charts, it just keeps drilling down so you can see the specifics of what issues they were having. They also used it to create some scatter plots or histograms to help optimize their drain intervals or determine exactly what their drain intervals were. So allow me to walk through a little bit of a case study of how one of the customers went about the integration. Well, their first step is contact the laboratory, see if they have an integration solution in place, whether they have an API. Once they found out yes, then they reviewed the capabilities, all right? They're known as endpoints when you reach out to an API. Remember I said it's kind of a smorgasbord. You can pick and choose what you want to do. Maybe you want to start out just retrieving the bulk data and maybe auto-generating work orders based on that bulk data. Maybe you want to move on with the sample submission or feeding telematics data. You get to pick and choose. Maybe you want to do it all. So to start with, the customer just started to pencil out a bit of a roadmap of what it looked like. If we go down this road of integration, what do we, the customer, need to be responsible for? And what will the laboratory help us out with? So they started penciling that out, what it would look like. The laboratory assisted them with this roadmap. And then once they understood what it would look like, they wanted to review the capabilities. And this specific customer said, well, what are our pain points? What do we want to accomplish with integration? Well, one, they realized that they would truly like that hour meter data and the fluid hours shared with the laboratory so that they could get an accurate picture of samples due. They wanted to synchronize equipment location and status. If they were moving equipment from one location to another, which they did frequently, they didn't want to have to call up the lab to tell them, all right, move the sample history. They also thought, man, wouldn't it be great when we look at an individual fluid analysis report, if we could quickly see the maintenance actions that we have taken in the past and the information we shared with the laboratory and see that right on our report. I want to dig into that a little bit more. They also wanted to monitor their oil drain in that holistic view through a scatter plot to determine if they actually had the correct drain interval or if they had the opportunity to extend their drain intervals. So again, just taking that bulk data, dropping it into a scatter plot, I was able to determine that. And then they wanted some real simplified reporting to increase visibility to the individual drill rigs. So knowing that, they kind of came up with a revised roadmap that addressed those specific pain points they were having. They realized that getting the proper hours to the laboratory when they did a sample submission was absolutely critical. Let's think about that for a minute. Why is that so critical for the laboratory to be aware of? Anybody for component hours or fluid time?
For mobile equipment, it goes against your PM series. It's like your PM 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have to know how many hours you have on the machine so you know what PM you're in.
Absolutely. Now think about what it means to the data analysts at the laboratory. Let's say they're just looking at fluid condition, and to tell you whether the oil is okay for continued use, what the laboratory looks at, we'll just use diesel engine for an example. We're going to look at the viscosity, the base number, and the oxidation to tell you, hey, it's time to drain that oil, or you're okay to continue to use. But think what a huge difference it means to the data analysts if they see you've only got 100 hours on the oil, and we're seeing that maybe it's at significant decrease in viscosity. That tells us, hey, it's not a problem with the lubricant. The lubricant isn't simply used up. You've got a real problem, a maintenance action that needs to be taken. In that example, maybe it's fuel dilution. You've got a bad injector. You're getting fuel dilution in the oil that's causing that viscosity to drop. So it makes a huge difference on the reliability of your fluid analysis results when the data analyst knows the component hours and the fluid time. Clicker's not quite working. The other thing they wanted to be sure to see, all right, if they provided that information to the laboratory about action taken, they wanted that when the next report come back for them to also have visibility of the action that was taken without the need for them to go back into their maintenance management platform and look at work order history. I want to show you a larger example of that. Probably still a little bit hard to read here. But see each one of these black lines? Well, this is the whole thing is a fluid analysis report with all the history. Each one of those black lines is where the customer took some sort of maintenance action and shared that with the laboratory. So let me ask you this. I'm going to go back to using an example of a diesel engine. If the laboratory says, hey, you have indication of coolant contamination in your oil, and the customer says, it's a bad oil cooler, it's leaking at the gaskets getting into our engine oil. So you replace the oil cooler, you put a brand new one on. What do you suppose is going to happen on that very next sample? Any thoughts what you might see in that next sample? You're probably going to see an increase in copper simply due to the leaching of the brand new oil cooler. So that next sample, you can see a little bit of increase in copper. Maybe the next sample, that copper level would start to come down a little bit, eventually go away. But it really makes a huge difference when you're reviewing the fluid analysis report at a glance. That maintenance planner and maintenance manager can look at it and say, I'm not worried about that little bit of increase in copper. It's probably leaching because we just now put a brand new oil cooler on it, and that history is right there in front of them. So again, integration through the API made sharing with the laboratory the action taken, that was taken, and the laboratory putting that on your reports to share back with you. All right, the other thing, large fleets were often split by location, the status by the laboratory account. It was really tough for them to keep up those equipment transfers in their system and then share the information with the lab, so they just simply made sure that as soon as they entered it into the maintenance management platform, that information automatically went to the API and was shared with the lab. Their other pain point was truly understanding what their drain intervals should be. So since they were able to pull the bulk sample data, and when I talk about bulk sample data, it's every single test that's performed on each component, and all the data analysts' text and recommendations and every bit of information about that component, you're able to pull it through the API in a CSV format, and then very easily create some scatter plots and histograms to look by equipment classification or component type and see how it's performing over time. And scatter plots are just absolutely terrific to say, all right, I just want to look at my QSK60 engines. I'm comparing viscosity versus hours on the oil, and just follow that down and see, at 500 hours, or maybe we can go to 750 hours based on the sample results, and feel really good about extending that drain interval. Too many people say, yeah, we want to extend our drain interval. And they say, all right, we're just going to push it from 250 to 500. And they don't do oil analysis when they jump that, because typically they're pulling oil analysis at the drain interval, and so they're just not taking advantage of all the capabilities that are there. With doing this, it makes it really quick and easy to determine what that drain interval should be.
So I have a quick question.
Yes?
Are you working
Great question. The laboratory really can't do that for you as far as, because there's so many systems out there, right? Whether it's J.D. Edwards or Oracle or email, the list goes on and on. So what we do is help guide you through how you can do that in your platform, and then you just have to work with your IT team to make it a reality. With that said, many customers tell us, look, we don't have the IT resources, we don't have the skills, we don't have the knowledge, so that's why our laboratory works with so many OEMs and third-party service providers to offer that turnkey solution for you. Our laboratory doesn't charge for the data integration and access to the API, but if you're working with that third-party service provider to provide that turnkey solution, then obviously time and effort and money put into that. So what those rates are is totally between you and the third-party service provider.
Do you have any insights in terms of how long it took them to complete the integration? Was it like a quarter project, or it took a year, or?
You know, it has varied so much. I've worked with well over 100 customers, and these are top-level customers. They have many, many sub-accounts. And that example I showed you with the SAP, that customer actually completed it in 24 hours. Now, obviously, they were real familiar with APIs already because they were using APIs for procurement and accounting. So once they had the security token, they were up and running. And yet I've got customers I've been working with for 6 months that are, eventually they'll probably say, all right, our IT team tried, it was for our first go in an API, and we've hired a third-party service provider. There are a bunch of CMMS and ERP systems that we've already partnered with. So if you're using some of the ones I mentioned earlier, the solution is already there. All you have to do is talk with that ERP or CMMS provider and say, hey, I want to integrate fluid analysis. They start up a laboratory you're working with, which one are you sending your samples to? And they just offer that turnkey solution.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Another thing this customer wanted to do is for the individual drill rigs, they wanted it to just really at a top level simplify the trending of their fluid analysis and the severity of the reports. So down the left-hand side here, column B, it had the component ID, and they could quickly see the sample trending based on severity. And this is kind of important because if you're sending in reports and they're coming back consecutive at high severity, so on that same component, let's say you have a severity 4, so you pull a sample in 30 days, and it's severity 4, another 30 days, it's another severity 4. It tells you one of two things. Either you're ignoring the reports and not doing any maintenance action based on those reports, or you are taking action, but whatever you're doing is not solving the problem. It's something different. You need to reevaluate what action do we need to take here to get these high severity reports off our plate. High severity reports, folks, are terrible because if you ignore them and you don't schedule them right away, that equipment's going to schedule time for you because it's just going to break down, and now you're faced with reactive, unscheduled maintenance, which is going to cost you 2 to 10 times higher to repair, greatly increases your loss in production. We always want planned, scheduled maintenance.
Do you find that in your experience that your customers are making these decisions purely based on the color that you're putting on the top of the report?
Some do. Some of those, as I mentioned earlier, that are auto-generating work orders are doing it on severity. Others have really tailored that down to specific analytes. Instead of, all right, as in that example, if iron reaches this parts per million, then we know for us in our industry, that's a problem. Because we've had failures when it's reached that high historically. Does that answer the question okay?
Do any of your customers do anticipatory predictive maintenance? In other words, it needs maintenance in 3 weeks, but I'm sending it to a job site for 4 months. Let's do the maintenance now and then send it out?
Oh, absolutely. that's always a consideration is operational demands, right? Give you a great example. When I was in mining, we said, all right, we can definitely go from 500 hours drain interval. Without doubt, just looking at the data, to 600 hours. But there's always that consideration. Does it make sense to extend it out to 600 hours when there's other things that we need to look at that 500 hours? We knew by 500 hours, we better do a frame inspection because we tended to get frame cracks at 500 hours. Couldn't risk pushing it out to 600. So there's always a check and balance, not only based on those maintenance needs, but also the production needs. But what's really important, and what's so important to the operations group, is that you do not end up in that event where they let you have the equipment and you take it down for maintenance and you think you had all the work orders completed and you give it back to them and they're calling you up, hey, guess what, it's broke down in the haul road or on the job site. Definitely want to avoid those. Let's talk just briefly, I've just got a couple more slides left here. Telematics and how can the laboratory help you out with your telematics data. How many of you monitor telematics data today? Are you doing so in raw data format, or do you have any fault trees, or are you just looking at fault codes?
Most of it's pretty raw. I mean, it's coming through, and I end up doing the analysis on my own.
So it kind of looks something like this?
Right, and then I'll plug it in and I'll do what I need.
Yeah, and it's a challenge, isn't it?
It takes time. So that's kind of the next phase we're at is we're big enough now that I need a system that integrates a lot of this stuff because, like I said, it becomes challenging.
I had reached out to one of our customers when I was first dabbling with this to see how much telematics data would be of value to our data analysts, because there's some relationships there. To give you an example, we had a customer that kept sending in samples on the same component. It was a diesel engine, and it kept coming back as fuel dilution. Now, as a data analyst at the laboratory, we could flag it high severity. We could tell the customer in the text logs that, hey, there's a problem with fuel dilution in your oil, and we recommend you check A, B, C, D, and E for the cause of fuel contamination. But then I got a telematics download from that customer, and we reviewed it, and sure enough, there was faults with injector number 3. And now we can say there's fuel dilution. We suggest you start inspecting with injector number 3 based on your telematics data. And it really narrowed down the troubleshooting and the time spent troubleshooting for the customer. This is a little spreadsheet customer sent me, again, just starting to dabble in this, and I'm trying to make sense of it all and how it all relates. One, I had a heck of a time sending the file to me, because this is just a small clip of the information from your telematics. This actually consisted of 1.4 million rows of data, over 34 individual bits of information. That was for one component for 30 days. And the customer told me, we're doing telematics, but we don't know what to do with it. It's just so overwhelming. And he admitted, he said, you know what, we're really using it as part of our autopsy. After it fails, we go back and look at our telematics data to see if there was any forewarning that we would have a failure. And that is so unfortunate, right? I mean, it takes away all the value you're doing all these condition monitoring tools. So I experimented a little bit, and I was able to return this back to the customer. I said, how would this be for your telematics data? You provide us a flat file, we'll turn it into some fault trees, and we have some terrific drill down capabilities here to understand what the telematics mean. And we can see here low brake pump pressure, excessive interaxle lock accumulator. This was a huge one, transmission abuse warnings. That's great to know, right? Because then you can go back and talk to the operator that was operating at that time. And down the right-hand side of the screen, as you click on each one of these, it shows you the asset that was associated.
So like our systems will like, oh, like one of the operators is running a truck and something happens, I'll get it, like my phone will like explode.
And you know right then.
And I'll know right there, and then I can call your supervisor and be like, hey, he can't, whatever he's doing, he needs to stop. Or our
Yeah.
truck, you need to send somebody out to look at it.
And if you have a third-party service provider that's doing this information and the telematics for you, they've already got their software that turns it into nice charts. The flood analysis laboratory can work directly with them to also integrate the flood analysis, if that's your weapon of choice, if you will, is to look at that telematics service provider software. Why not see your flood analysis results right there as well? But the journey doesn't end there. Again, this is something I recently looking at, but I mentioned if you're looking at optimizing your drain intervals, there's certain things we look at. And for this customer, they wanted to know, all right, can we safely extend our drain interval out from where we're currently draining our oil? And so I combined the fluid analysis results, again, looking at that viscosity of diesel engines, the base number, oxidation, plotted that on a scattergram, but there was some outliers when I looked at that data. There was places where viscosity was really high, viscosity was really low, so I wanted to understand the relationship between that. So I went with their telematics data, and I started looking at operating temperature, and there was a direct correlation, as you can probably appreciate, to say, all right, you can safely extend your drain interval to 500 hours as long as your operating temperature, engine operating temperature, is below 230 degrees. These instances where the telematics showed the operating condition was up to that 260, 270, you could develop a direct correlation of, now you've got to be down at that 250 hours when so many occurrences of this exist. And really useful for the customer, right? Because you don't want to just take it per blank, but yeah, we can extend out to 500 hours and be good. The last thing you want is to realize that value of increasing your drain intervals, but you sure don't want to do it at a risk of component health. So a lot of things go into consideration here. Whoop, one slide too many. So with that, we've still got about 10 minutes left here, and just want to open it up for any questions you might have. Come on, there's got to be some.